Greg, for those of you who don't know, is probably probably the longest running barbecue podcast there is in history ever in the world. Greg, tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started with it.
So it started all the way back in what would be 2004. Not podcasting, but I had gotten a Weber Smoky Mountain for my Father's Day gift that my wife bought me. Had no idea how to use it, read the directions that came with it. That was a nightmare, of course. And then right before I threw it out, somebody said, well, there's this website called Virtual Weber Bullet, specifically dedicated to Weber Smoky Mountain. It was a message board. So I went on the message board, quickly realized I was cooking on it the wrong way. And I had made like this supremely underwhelming rack of spare ribs. And I was like, I can't believe I wasted this much time for this result. What a travesty. But the Virtual Weber Bullet saved me. And I met a whole bunch of great people through that online entity and decided I could also make my own forum at the time. So that's what I did. I started a barbecue forum. That's when they were really starting to become like, that was hot technology back then. You could go online, you could post a question, and then maybe in a day or two you could come back and see a whole bunch of different answers. Or if it was really popular, you don't have to wait 15, 20 minutes and you're getting a whole bunch of answers. And it grew into one of the bigger barbecue forums across the internet. And around 2000,
was that like at the same time as like Barbecue Brethren was getting hot and stuff like that?
Well, yeah. So like in my heyday, it was Barbecue Brethren. It was Barbecue Forum that was founded by Ray Basso.
Yes.
There were a number of other forums. It's like anything, right? Once it gets popular, everybody wants to dip their foot in the pool and see what it's all about.
I remember Uncle Dave getting all hot and bothered on those things. He was getting into arguments.
You could react in real time to people over whatever you were disagreeing with. Otherwise, you're reading it in the paper, or if you're a KCBS member, you're reading it in the bullshit and you're swearing at your wife or whoever about how this guy's stupid that's writing this article. Well, now you had an outlet where you could really start engaging with people and give real-time feedback. So it was really revolutionary at the time. And in 2006, there was a huge influx of forums. So to try and separate, I had just started hearing about this thing called podcasting. The guy that did the barbecue forum started podcasting. It was horrible. And I was like, well, I could try it, and there's no way I'm going to be as bad as Ray Basso is at this. So at least I won't be the worst. And so I started. It really just covered the members of the forum. It was horrible. I mean, the first 12 shows of my podcasting career aren't even available on the internet. I have them in a safe in my house because they're terrible. But we learn as we go, of course.
Sure.
So that was separator number one. And then 2008, I took the show to a live format because, of course, between 6 and 8, there was an influx of barbecue podcasts. So to re-separate, I went to the live show, found a guy through Craigslist that was starting an internet radio station out in LA who was looking for talent to take up about an hour or so during a portion of the afternoon or evening. And I got a hold of him. He's like, you can talk about barbecue once a week for an hour? And I said, yeah, I've been doing it for 2 years. And he said, well, I don't know how we're going to make this happen because everybody else is going to be coming to the studio in LA. And I said, we'll figure it out. And we sure did. And he would connect to me, and then the sound would go out over his servers in Los Angeles. Cool. And that's the way the live show started. Eventually grew into a second hour. And 2024, here we are.
Was it always the BBQ Central Show? Did you start with that name?
No, it was originally, everything was called, I don't know if I'm going to get sued for this or not, but BBQ the number 4 the letter U.com was the website, and the forum originally was called Barbecue for You.
That's why your email is that. Okay, now it makes sense.
And then the show originally was the Barbecue for You podcast. And then one night, right around New Year's, I got a call from a guy who said, I have the trademark on BBQ-4-U. Only that. And I said, so what? And he said, "You're not allowed to use that anymore, or I'll sue you." And I said, "Go ahead and sue me. I have no money. Go ahead, knock yourself out." And so I consulted a lawyer that was also a member of my forum, and he said, "Hey, I did a little research on this guy. It looks like he does it every couple of years. And if you ever thought about maybe doing a name change, this is probably as good a time as any to do it." And consulted a few folks and realized BBQ Central would probably be better, and away we went. Subsequently have gotten all the right legal stuff to keep me protected from some douchebag deciding to do that to me again down the road. So no worries on that, and that's how we've been ever since.
Awesome. I think that's so cool that you kind of got pushed into the live scene, and there's not very many live shows right now. You know, most of the podcasts that I listen to, that everybody listens to, are all recorded, and I think that's, you know, special. There's always some, I guess, from your perspective, there's always some chance that something's not going to go quite right or anything. Have you ever had any circumstances where it gets challenging doing a live show?
So in the beginning, I just blindly assumed nothing would go wrong. Everybody would show up. It was just going to be all gold. And quickly I realized there's a technology issue that's hanging up somebody from connecting in, or the phone doesn't work, or the internet went down, or you name it. And we've gone through the paces. But what I quickly learned was, if you're going to do the live show, you got to have stuff that's evergreen, that's just sitting in the back. So if you and I were going to be doing an interview and Chicago caught on fire and you couldn't make it, I'm not just sitting there going, well, what am I going to do for the next 18 minutes? It was supposed to be me and Duce talking about competition barbecue or the catering company or both of those things, and now I have 18 minutes. It might not seem like a lot of time, but as a host, Duce, you can certainly attest. Talking for 18 minutes on the fly, very tough to do, no matter how great of a speaker you are, how creative you are. It's very tough to do, especially regularly. Maybe once in a while you can get away with it. So that's why whenever I roll across something that I think is interesting, that has no expiration date on it, I'll stick it in a file, and then I can usually tell now, so many years into it, if somebody's not in my switch box, or it's a regular guest and all of a sudden they weren't communicating with me earlier in the day. There's little spidey sense things that happen, and so I'll start to gear up just in case. And if that happens, now I have stuff I can fall back on, or I can read some emails that I didn't get into in the beginning of the show open. So there's filler, but it isn't just filling nonsense. It is show related, or it's a take that I wanted to get to at some point. But I mean, like I said, you name it. I've experienced something where I've had to, dive left real quick to keep the show going.
You're well known, especially people that have been on your show, for being a stickler for the audio situation and making sure that people have the right microphone. Why is that so important to you, and why is it as important as a podcast in general?
It's my opinion, but I think there's so many other options for content nowadays. Why would you allow somebody to make a decision that has nothing to do with the content and the quality? Well, it does have to do with the quality, but if it doesn't have anything to do with the content of the show, if you're bringing great information, you're bringing value, but your sound sucks, strike 2, 3. You're done. I mean, maybe one time, but there's been plenty of shows that I don't want to bore you with an anecdote, but my oldest daughter played very competitive volleyball, eventually played in college, and on one of her travel teams, she had a coach. We became friendly, and her friend had this great podcast concept that they got into in the pandemic, and it dealt a lot with mental health of athletes and what the real life athletics is like in the collegiate sense. And it was great, and I listened to it, and their sound was shit, but the content was so compelling. I would write them notes, and I was like, can somebody please spend $60 per microphone and you guys sound like professionals, because I'm literally suffering through your crappy sound because the content is carrying it, but it's not going to be long-term viability here, to the point where I bought them microphones. And then
I was just thinking that. I was like,
I did. I bought them. I was like, girls, I'm just buying you the stuff, and you're going to sound great. And then they used it one time, and then they fell out of love with it, and it was all over.
Oh, my gosh.
I listened 20 episodes, 25 episodes, because
That's
the
so
content
crazy.
was so good. But in this day and age, like in 2024, you can't get away with it. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you could still ride the fence of having shitty audio as the host. I decided back then I wasn't going to be I never wanted to have shitty audio as a host, number one. But then I also decided that I was going to also demand my level of audio from my guests. Because why have me sound great when it's very easy for you to sound great as well? And you can do it very inexpensively. A lot of bad things happen in the pandemic, but the one thing it taught us is everybody can sound almost broadcast studio quality for very little money. USB microphone into the computer, do a couple microphone tricks, you sound like $1 million. And there's no reason that anybody that's hosting any kind of show or their guests, like you said, most of the shows are not live. Like, I understand that it's a bit of a hurdle for me to ask my guests to do that, but I send them gear in advance. Like, my show's booked up mostly, a month and a half to 2 months out, depending on what time of year it is. And I will say, if you don't want to buy one, I will send you one, but you're not getting on the show otherwise. Your content isn't that great where I'm going to sacrifice you sounding like you're in an echoey bathroom. We don't do that anymore. I stopped doing that 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the guests,
well, good for you to maintain that quality. And I think it's the right thing.
I wanted to raise not just podcasts, but broadcasting in general. I wanted to raise the sound bar to where even nationally syndicated radio shows would say, if we have recurring guests, we're going to make sure that they're mic'd up, especially if we're using Zoom, because this is what the standard should be, having great quality audio. If there's late breaking news and you got to use the phone, I get it, but everybody knows what the phone sounds like. But you should never have a guest connecting in through a video source like Zoom or whatever we're using here.
Yeah.
And sound like crap, only to have that person show up on his own TV show later in the night and be professionally mic'd up and sound like $1 million. Like, don't you care about the audience? Don't you care about the host that's giving you time? And doesn't the host care to not sound like shit? It's so easy. So I'm trying to put the whole industry on my back and raise the level of audio. I mean,
Good
you
for
care, Duce. You came to me, you said, what do we need to do? How much do I need to spend? Blah, blah. I gave you a bunch of options. You don't need to spend $250, $300 on a USB microphone. It can be $69. That's the one that I recommend to everybody, and it sounds like $1 million. But you cared enough to at least start out the right way. And I think we're finally getting to that point where most people want to sound good, and they want their guests to sound good too.
I remember listening to a Gary V podcast, and he was clearly like on someone's stage, like repurposing the content. Like, it wasn't his thing to record it. He was just there speaking, but it was the worst audio. And I am not kidding when I say, I'm like, Greg would be so pissed if he was listening to this. Oh man, that's awesome.
Matters. I think it matters because
it does. I turned it off. I love listening to Gary V's great message. I know you listen to what he has to say and stuff like that, but it's not worth, bearing through this horrible audio cracking mic and everything. It's not worth it.
As a host, I'm like, I would rather have somebody get done with an interview and go, oh, I wish it went longer, than to and because we both sound pristine, instead of having one side sound like ass. And they're like, man, this thing won't end. Or, oh, God, thank God it's over. Like, they're tired from having to suffer through listening to bad audio, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Let's talk a little bit about how the internet and social media and podcasting has really changed, I think, over the last 5 years, maybe even the last 3.5 years since the pandemic. Anytime during the pandemic and forward, we'll say. because it's just been such an influx of more people producing content, I feel, in my opinion. I mean, we started then, right after the pandemic, we kind of went all in and started, really putting attention on producing content, and got us into the podcast and everything else. And I've noticed, a lot of newer barbecue podcasts. What's your opinion on where that barbecue podcast scene is? Do you feel like people are bringing value? How can you, speak your mind about what you think about that?
I'm happy to listen to every barbecue podcast there is out there. I try and listen to all of them. If I think there's some potential and there's a way for me to help them ramp up the learning curve, I've been known to reach out to folks just on my own, say, hey, take it or leave it. Free advice is worth what you pay for it, right? But you might want to try this, you might want to try that, or do this instead, just see if it works. If not, who cares? The bottom line is this. There was me, and then there's this, and then there's still me, and then there'll be other stuff, and then there will still be me. So there's a level of dedication that it takes to have a successful podcast, number one. And then number two, you have to have put yourself in a place to succeed. And that comes from figuring out a concept of a show and then being able to do it repeatedly, not the same show, but being able to repeat a concept for you to come back to every week or every other week or whatever the release schedule is going to be. By the way, that's important too. You decide on a release schedule and then you live and die by the release schedule. Yep. If you go every week, you got to figure out how to make it work every week. If it's going to be once a month, you got to figure out how to do it once a month. You can miss one. If you miss 2 or 3, then the audience can check out. As soon as they realize you're not invested in it, then they divest quickly and will find 10,000 other options to fill their time.
There's so much out there.
So much out there. So I just think you need to want to commit. I always tell everybody, if you're getting into, unless you're a superstar already in some way, celebrity-wise or comedian, every day I'm seeing these people get $50 and $100 million podcast deals. And I'm like, your boy's been out here hustling for almost 20 years. I can't get a sniff, but I know I'll still be here when everybody else is gone because I did it because I wanted to do it and I was passionate about the topic in general and have just found a way to work through all the different segments of the industry. I've made a lot of great friendships over the years, a lot of great contacts over the years. Even if we're not friends, I have contacts all over.
For sure.
It's just been something where if all the sponsors dry up tomorrow, the show will still go on tomorrow night because I like doing it. I like prepping for it. I like everything about it. And if you're in there for the money, you're going to be done in 6 months. Unless you're a star, unless you're coming into it already with some kind of audience. But if you're like most of us, starting out at zero, and the expectation is you're going to be pulling down big fat checks inside of 6 months, I'm here to burst your bubble, Johnny. Like that's probably
that
not
ain't happening. Yeah.
Maybe you're great, right? I mean, prove me wrong, please. But I've been around long enough to realize that if you're doing it for the money first, you're going to fail quick.
Right.
You got to do it because you're passionate about it, and you just really can't worry about what anybody else thinks. I mean, that's kind of a life lesson too, but do it because you want to do it, and do it the way you want to do it. I can't tell you how many emails I get every week telling me how bad the show is and how to
run your show.
You're annoying, and you do this and you do that, and I'm like, okay, I'll be back Tuesday, and so will you. So those are like that's what I don't even know if I answered the question, but I think I'm happy that there are other barbecue podcast options, and I listen to a lot of them, and I'm fans of some of them. So
that's really cool.
And if anybody ever had any questions for me, even if you're not in the barbecue space, like I know a lot about podcasting in general, then please, reach out. I want to help.
Yeah, I'm excited to do our podcast because the thing I get most out of it is the relationship building. I get to, hook up with you. If it wasn't for the podcast, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Yep. I got to talk to Malcolm and Darren, and then I get to go a little bit outside of the barbecue world and talk to some more marketing people like Matt Plapp and Sean Walchef and stuff like that. And I really enjoy keeping those relationships. I had a new relationship with somebody that I haven't seen since we were kids, and he's the executive chef of Blue Plate, and we did a collab together. I had him on the podcast, and now we're doing another bigger event down at Blue Plate next week. And that's what I'm excited about, is to keep evolving and growing as not just a barbecue guy, but an entrepreneur in our business and stuff like that. So it's really been, and I have to stop saying stuff like that. Every time I say it, it drives me crazy because I listen to it on the podcast and I keep on saying it. It's driving me crazy.
You want to know how to fix it?
Yes. How do you fix that?
Do you spend a lot of time in the car?
Not too much time, but I spend a lot of time at the gym, so that could be something. I don't know.
Well, you're going to have to decide you want to do it or not in the gym. But as a sales guy, I do see my fair share of windshield time. Whenever I'm in the car, I'm talking just to myself, talking out loud, talking like I would be on the show, but I'm just commenting on the car next to me, or I'm talking about the weather, or talking
in your
about
show
anything.
Voice.
Yeah, like my normal show cadence, just like this. I'm doing this, but I'm doing it in the car, and I'm talking about the green Taurus that's ahead of me, and as we're going 75 miles an hour, and constantly thinking about the words that I'm using, and then I'll get to a point where I can't think of the next word. And the old me would go, do the word filler words or whatever, because you feel uncomfortable not saying anything in that moment of silence. Instead of waiting, it's silent. That's okay. We'll find that word and then we'll keep going. The normal habit is to and stuff like that, whatever the filler, the crutch, the fallback is. So what I have found is, like everything, you want to get better at it, practice. You want to get better talking, talk a lot, talk out loud. But you can't talk in your head. You got to talk out loud, and you got to talk like you're doing it on the show. And then you have to find peace with silence. Because 1 second sounds like 1 minute, but it's really 1 second. And also, the pause will draw the audience in. If you're going, and then there's a nice 1 or 2 second pause, the audience is like, ooh. They're leaning in.
I've noticed that listening to podcasts where it's like, like you listen more intently after that pause. That's interesting that you brought that up.
The pause is giving you,
sure noticed that.
As a listener, the pause is giving you time to process what the host has actually been saying. You don't want to be talking for 4 or 5 minutes at a clip, and it's just info. Stop every so often. Take a pause. Let the audience realize what you've been saying. Let them take it in and process that, and then pick it back up and start rolling again. Well-placed pause there's nothing better than a well-placed pause.